Hello and welcome to the Las Vegas Jewish Film Festival. My name is Neil Popish. I am the program director with the Jewish Community Center, a division of Jewish Nevada. We are glad that you can join us for our 12th film webinar over the past 11 months. I want to wish special thanks to the Robinson and Frankoff families for their sponsorship and dedication to Jewish film. I also would like to thank Joshua Abbey and the Las Vegas Jewish Film Festival for their partnership. Thank you as well to all of our sponsors that are listed on the screen, and especially our media sponsor, the Las Vegas Review Journal. I'd like to now introduce Joshua Abbey, who will introduce our panelists.
Hello and welcome. Thank you, Neil. We are very privileged today to have two extraordinary guests who are going to be talking about our special subject, Ben Shahn. First, I'd like to introduce Frances K. Pohl, who's on the upper left of your screen.
Hello.
She is the Dr. Marianne Vanderzyl Reynolds Professor of Humanities and Professor of Art History Emerita at Pomona College in Claremont, California. She received her PhD from the University of California, Los Angeles, and she has taught a wide variety of courses in 19th and 20th century North American art. Her work is focused on the art of the United States, and in particular, the work of Ben Shahn, about whom she has written 2 books, and the relationship between the visual arts and working class culture. Frances is also proud of her textbook on American art called Framing America, A Social History of American Art. This was published by Thames and Hudson in 2002 and is now in its 4th edition. Our other special guest at the bottom of your screen is Amanda Fortini, who has written for the New York Times, the New Yorker, T, the New York Times Style Magazine, The Believer, California Sunday, Vanity Fair, and New York Magazine. Her essays have been widely anthologized, including Best American Political Writing, and she is the recipient of the Rebkin Prize for the Arts in Journalism. She is currently a Beverly Rogers Fellow at Black Mountain Institute at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and Amanda lives both in Las Vegas, Nevada, and in Livingston, Montana. So ladies, welcome. Thank you for delving into this fascinating human being who I believe has enormous relevance to many of the current issues that our society is facing. And we're gonna let Amanda take the lead on starting the conversation, and then I will be back at the end to tell you about our next month's offering.
Thank you. So Frances, I was wondering if we could start. This might be a little bit public access television to do this, but I have your books here. Ben Shahn, New Deal Artist in a Cold War Climate, and then your other book, Ben Shahn here. And I'm wondering if you could just talk, they're wonderful books. I wanted to show them in case viewers wanted to get them for themselves. If you could talk, we could start by you just talking a little bit about how you got interested in Ben Shahn, how you came to work on, to focus on his work and to write about him, and specifically also how you came to focus on 1947 to 54, the Cold War period.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for showing my books. I have been spending the last couple of days reading them myself because it's been a while since I've had to think about some of the questions that'll be the focus of today's discussion. So I came across Shahn in the mid-1970s when I was an undergrad at the University of British Columbia. And I had just decided to be an art history major. And I was taking a class on Marxism and art. So this was, again, the early 1970s when Marxist art history was really beginning to have a presence within the field of art history in general. And one of the topics that was on the list of potential papers for the semester was Ben Shahn and his Sacco and Vanzetti series, the 2 Italian anarchist immigrants who were arrested in 1921 They were accused of robbing and murdering a paymaster in Braintree, Massachusetts. And they were tried and found guilty, and then there were several appeals that went on until 1927. So I was really interested in this project because my approach to art history was very political, and also they were Italian immigrants and leftist anarchists, and my mother's parents had immigrated from Italy. And so there was a personal dimension to my selection of this topic. So I did this paper, and Shahn is best known for his work in the 1930s as what many people called social realism, artists who were engaged with political activities, both in the studio and outside of the studio. And so a couple of years later, I'd finished my BA and I was doing a master's and looking for a thesis topic. And I took a class on abstract expressionism. The focus of the class was the period post-World War II, 1946-47 through until the early 1960s. And again, in art history textbooks, at least most textbooks, not necessarily mine, the 1950s is seen as the heyday of abstract expressionism. Mm-hmm. So I was doing a paper, or looking for a paper topic, and I was flipping through journals from the early 1950s, and I came across a review of an exhibition at the Venice Biennale. It was the US Pavilion there. And the only two artists were sent to represent US painting, and one was Ben Shahn and one was Willem de Kooning. And it immediately struck me as highly unusual, according to what I had learned so far about American art history. De Kooning was supposed to be there. He was the abstract expressionist. Shahn wasn't supposed to be there. He was someone who was supposed to be well-known in the 1930s, not in the 1950s. Mm-hmm. So that ended up being my master's thesis, Ben Shahn's presence at the Venice Biennale. Why was he there?
Why was he there?
Why was he there? Well, those of you who know American history, 1954 was really the height of McCarthyism. It was just the cusp, and I guess the exhibition would have been organized in 1953, which was, one could argue, really the height of McCarthyism, because in 54, in February, I think it was, Ed Murrow presents his program on See It Now that focuses on McCarthy, and really that's the beginning of the end of McCarthy. Mm-hmm. And so, the organizers of the Venice Biennale in 53, which was overseen by the Museum of Modern Art, people at the museum were very cognizant of the political dimension of what was going on within the art world and cultural foreign policy. And they understood, certainly the people in Italy understood, according to the reviews of the exhibition, that Europe was very concerned about McCarthyism and about its impact on US foreign policy. One could argue exactly the same thing that they were concerned about up until this year, mm-hmm. About Trump's impact on foreign policy and the relationship in particular with Europe. And Europe obviously had even more reason to be concerned because this was after World War II, and Europe really relied on the US to help rebuild its economy and literally rebuild its cities. So Ben Shahn, it turns out, was popular, more popular according to the press reviews than de Kooning in Venice in 1954, because he represented a part of the American art world and American in general that was critical of McCarthy, that was fighting back against anti-communism. He represented this kind of liberal tradition in the US that was so important for people in Europe, particularly at that moment in time. And also, like me, many of the Italians were attracted to Shahn's paintings because they dealt with Italy. He had done a series of paintings immediately after the last years of World War II, and then the few years after that. They also included, the museum included some of Shahn's labor posters. So Italy is a very kind of organized labor focused country. The Communist Party was very strong. And so for a variety of political reasons, Shahn was sent there and was received very positively. Critics also liked Shahn's modernist, but not totally abstract figurative style.
Right.
They saw de Kooning as representative of this kind of brash, aggressive nature of much of US foreign policy as well. As much as Europe depended on the US, many people in Europe objected to the strings that were attached to much of US foreign aid. Some of those strings involving pressure on European governments to reject the influence of the political left in their governing bodies. So for all of those reasons, Shahn ended up, I was surprised when I saw he was sent, and he was better received. The press was more positive about his work than it was about de Kooning.
Well, you were talking about his popularity, and you bring up something that has kind of baffled me a little bit since I started, delving into your books and the documentary and Shahn in general. He was just a sort of flicker in my art history education or whatever, but it feels like, he was so popular. The documentary says that people who had never been to a museum or a gallery, knew who he was. He did the cover of Time. He was in Harper's. He had a show at MoMA. And yet somehow he's become sort of, lost to the annals of time or something. He's not as well remembered as like de Kooning is, for instance. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. I may be wrong. I'm sure I'm sure there's a specific, segment of people who do really know who he is. But I know a lot about art, and he was only a footnote for me. So I was just wondering if you could talk about that, why that is.
Well, I think it's in part a result of the field of art history itself. Mm-hmm. And this is something I became even more aware of when I was writing my textbook. Who gets included?
Right.
When do they get included? How much information can you present in one book or one class? Often as art historians, we have to focus on something that is seen as particularly relevant at each moment in time that can capture some of the major concerns of artists, of citizens in general at that moment. And so the 1930s was seen as a time when so many artists became politicized, became involved in creating a very specific narrative of activist politics. Mm-hmm. And so Shahn, it makes sense to have him there. If you go on to do more detailed research, if you have the privilege, the luck to go to graduate school and to narrow in your focus, then you discover that there are an amazing number of people who were well known and popular at one period of time, mm-hmm. and yet disappear later because something new has emerged. And this is also something that occurred particularly in the 20th century and the second half of the 20th century in American art history, the celebration of the new. I think that, who was it that did, was it Robert Hughes, The Shock of the New, this TV series about, modern or modernist art. And so Shahn was not producing the latest, the newest of art styles or art content after World War II. And we don't have enough time to go into the reasons why abstraction emerged as the signature style of post-war America. But at the time, even in the late 40s and early 50s, Shahn was still very much a presence in the art world. Mm-hmm. It's only when the textbooks get written in the 60s and 70s that the people who write them, who may have tended, certainly for the 50s, focused more on the move to abstraction than they did on the continuation of figuration. So Shahn has a public presence that doesn't get written about in art history textbooks.
Right.
And until his death, he really did. But he also did suffer in terms of that critical response to his work, which often in the 50s placed it in the category of less significant, derivative, old school, that abstraction was the way of the future for anyone who wanted to be a significant American artist. At the same time, I could say that Shahn was an inspiration to people like Rauschenberg, people who, even as abstraction was emerging as a signature style of American democracy in the 50s, because it was always compared to the figurative tradition of the Soviet Union. So during a Cold War period, whatever is the furthest away from Soviet politics, Soviet art, culture in general, that is celebrated as the most American.
Right.
So Shahn was not in that category. But Rauschenberg loved Shahn's kind of folk presence, the objects that Shahn loved to create that were these details that spoke to people's character or where they came from. So even in the world of avant-garde art in the 1950s, it wasn't totally abstraction. There were figurative people, the precursors of pop art, that were creating their own kinds of subcultures in the art world, particularly in New York City, where Shahn's work was extremely well known.
Yeah, it does seem like it's just the nature of movements in art or in the arts to just, negate the immediate past rather than sort of acknowledge it as the building blocks on which, the new arrives, basically.
Yeah, and you're right to say that he was recognized not just in the art world, but as a political artist, as a graphic artist. And he valued his access to that broad audience, the audience that read Harper's, that read The Nation, The New Republic, Scientific American, Time, Fortune. His was a real graphic presence, graphic in terms of style and graphic in terms of the articles that he illustrated or the people whom he did portraits of. They were people who were politically liberal, if not left, who were involved in really important political movements of the time.
How much did he, in the film and some of the other things I read, it says that he didn't differentiate between his commercial and fine art really at all. Bernarda said, he doesn't, there's this bit quoting her, he didn't think of illustration as a lesser art or whatever. Is that true? Did he not sort of make a distinction in his work? Or I guess, how did one feed the other? I'm kind of interested in how they worked for him in terms of his, larger oeuvre.
Yeah. I think he did understand that his painting carried a different kind of significance for his reputation as an artist. It hung in galleries. It was written about more often than his graphic work was written about. But I agree with Bernarda that he didn't value the commercial work as less significant than his fine art or his painting. His work is very much a continuum. He was a photographer in the 1930s into the early 40s. He didn't really continue with the photographic practice. That came out of his work for the Farm Security Administration, one of Roosevelt's many agencies set up to deal with the economic depression. So he would take photographs. He trained as a lithographer, as a graphic artist when he was in his teens. So he had that skill already. And he understood that what was most important to him by the early 1930s, late 20s, early 30s, was to create imagery that had significance for as broad a range of people as possible. So the photographs allowed him to capture scenes that he wanted, he saw as interesting formally and in terms of content. He couldn't sketch them fast enough. So photographs were kind of aids to his broader artistic practice. Those photographs would be the basis for illustrations for journal articles. They'd be the basis for paintings. They would be the basis for posters that he would do for the Congress of Industrial Organization or for the Democratic Party's political campaigns during presidential and congressional elections. So there really was a continuum. He didn't segment his work into the important fine art and then the less important graphic or political art.
Yeah, I was asking, one of the reasons I asked that is because, as I said, the film made that point, but then I was reading his, the lectures that he did, the Charles Eliot Norton, I think, lectures. Right. Yeah, I didn't know if I had the names transposed. And in one of them, he says that there are certain subjects or ideas that he felt that drawing couldn't accommodate, that it had to be accommodated by a painting. I don't have the exact quote, but so I was kind of interested in hearing more about that. Yeah.
Well, I think, and having just reread again some of what I'd written earlier,
yeah,
when he did the illustrations for the Harper's article on the Chicago tenement fire, this is in 1947 or 48. I think the article was published in 48 by John Bartlow Martin. A Black man in Chicago, there was a fire in the tenement where he lived. His 4 children were killed. He ended up shooting the landlord because he believed the landlord had set the fire. So Shahn did several illustrations, and he was talking about, should he produce illustrations that are more generic, symbolic? Should he go with the specific detail? And he decided to go with detail because it was the individual nature of this tragedy that was significant, even though it was also representative of the larger existence of discrimination against Black people in the US. So he did these scenes of the home of Hickman in the South before he moved to Chicago, and the tenement where the fire was, but he also included this kind of fire beast on top of the tenement. And afterwards, he said in this essay, what's the essay? The Biography of a Painting. It was the Biography of a Painting, and in the Shape of Content, the book, the collection of the Harvard essays or lectures. He said that there was something that bigger in that tragedy that could not be captured in an illustration for an article. So in that sense, yes, the paintings and the murals that he produced are a kind of culmination of his graphic work. They're able to accommodate multiple ideas that he worked out through his illustrations. And because of the nature of painting or murals, they're larger, they are primarily in color. They're a medium where you can play with a greater breadth of ideas. You can create these allegories, and the painting that came out of that Hickman tragedy was a painting called Allegory, where he combines kind of symbols that represent not only the tragedy of the Hickman family, but also his own experience of fire as a young boy in Vilcomere, as a young teenager in Brooklyn when the family home burns down, the fires of the Holocaust. He's able to capture something about the emotion of that tragedy in painting.
How much time between when he was working on the Hickman illustrations and then the Allegory painting? How much?
Within a year.
Within a year, okay. So he's continuing to rework it. Okay.
Right.
I liked what you said in your book, where you said if he was going to take a commission, from a magazine, you said it said that he considered he would take it if it presented a formal, personal, or moral challenge, which I thought was, you know, just a really kind of great way of thinking about whether to take on a project as an artist, you know, and did convey that he took the graphic work quite seriously also, you know, he wasn't just dashing it off for money or whatever. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about his evolution as an artist. We've been touching on it indirectly, but from the social realism to the more personal realism to, you know, the more, his feeling that he needed more to create in a more universal register around the time of World War II.
Well, his work has always been, or was always, connected with his experience in the world, his history, his biography, one could say. And I guess you could argue that about any artist, that styles and subject matter change as the person moves through time, that when you are a young person, you have a different set of interests. So there's the personal biography, but there's also the physical experience, the places that Shahn lived. 8 years in Vilkomir in Eastern Europe, or the western edge of Russia, in the Pale of Settlement, where the majority of Russian Jews lived. The experience of pogroms, of discrimination against Jews there, the move to the US with a whole other kind of range of opportunities to progress, to get educated, to become an artist, but also experiencing the same kinds of discrimination against Jews, the anti-Semitism that existed, even if it wasn't of the same nature as in Russia. And so Shahn's apprenticeship as a graphic artist was the result of a financial need on the part of his family, but his family was also, his father in particular, you know, a politically progressive carver, craftsperson, intellectual, who instilled in Shahn many of these values about justice and about the execution of a craft as carefully and as finely as possible, and a pursuit of knowledge. So Shahn sees the graphic work not simply as something he has to do in order to make a living, but as a challenge, as something that is in the visual realm that he's already very interested in. So he does the National Academy of Design, goes to night school, studies science as well as art, goes traveling, experiments with all of those modernist styles in Europe that were seen as the most significant. So he plays with all these styles, and then he comes back, and there's a famous passage where he says, you know, I've seen all these things, I've tried all these styles, they just don't feel like me. I want to tell stories. He's a storyteller. He's famous or infamous for his ability to narrate tales to large groups of people or small groups. So his style evolves as he himself understands who he is in the world. And he wanted to tell stories, and he wanted to tell stories that dealt with the kinds of questions about social justice that were of a concern to a progressive left community, Jewish and non-Jewish, in New York in the 20s and into the 30s. So he enters the art world at that moment in time, the crash, the Great Depression. And for that reason, the economic hardships come together with his own understanding of discrimination and struggle, and he becomes involved with organized labor. And so his work, to be part of an organized labor movement, has to be legible to a large group of people. And he was already committed to a legible art, even though he was moving, you know, abstracting his figures, creating imagery that was flatter than three-dimensional naturalistic rendering of a human figure might be. And so often the people he worked for within the labor movement weren't always impressed or didn't always look favorably upon his designs for posters, because they wanted more heroic images of workers. So his desire to create images that spoke to a broad audience was in tension with his desire to follow the evolution of art practice that was occurring in the art world, which was towards a kind of modernist abstraction. So he was always trying to find a balance between those two, between exploring those formal issues that were very much what abstraction was about, exploration of formal issues. But he always wanted to be connected to a broader audience. He wanted a legibility to be a key factor within his artwork. So this is how so the Depression reinforces the political part. He's called a social realist, but then he goes on this photographic trip for the FSA and he sees other parts of the country. He'd hardly ever been out of New York before, or New York, New Jersey. And he begins to feel that this was this shift from a social realism to a personal realism, that maybe just doing pictures of political movements of Sakon Vanzetti or of Tom Mooney, the labor leader, wasn't enough to capture what was going on in America. He saw these families struggling to survive. So he moves into this vein of painting that focuses on people sitting on the grass playing a harmonica, or kids playing handball, in a back alley. So it's not the political narrative, it's the nature of people's lives as they struggle to survive and to flourish. And then World War II creates this crisis for so many people in the visual arts and outside the visual arts. How do you capture the magnitude of that destruction? And if you're Jewish, how do you capture the magnitude of the Holocaust? And that pushed Shahn, along with many other artists, to search for something that was not a narrative of the horrific loss, because how could you capture in a narrative fashion the extent of that loss? But something that has a more symbolic, or he said universal significance, a way to express the emotional impact of that loss, that major tragedy. So, social, personal, symbolic, or universal.
Where do you think, I mean, maybe it just comes from his background, that you were just narrating for us, but where do you think his deep connection to working people and poor people comes from his background as an immigrant, from his childhood and the discrimination that he faced, from, his Jewishness? I don't know, what do you think accounts for it? Because it's really deep and really humanist,
I do think it is. It's his personal background. Diana Linden, another art historian, has written a book on the murals that Shahn created in the 1930s, early 1940s. And she looks a lot at the influence of Shahn's Jewishness on his work. And this was more of a topic in the 50s and 60s. Is there Jewish art in America? What does a Jewish art look like? If you're Jewish and you create art, is it Jewish art? And Shahn was always resistant to being categorized as a Jewish artist. He's Jewish and he makes art. She argues, and I agree with her, that Shahn's Jewishness comes out in his concern for social justice, in his engagement with the kinds of political and social and moral issues that the large segments of the Jewish community that he lived in and grew up in were concerned with. Justice is always a great concern. He went for 8 years, well, not 8 years, whenever the schooling started at maybe 3 or 4 or 5, until he was 8, he studied the Old Testament. He went to, religious schools. He debated about issues of justice and injustice. There's lots of stories that he tells about his trying to come to terms with segments of the Old Testament that he found really problematic because it just didn't seem fair. And then his father, who was involved in protests against the Tsar, and provided him with a model of an intellectual, of an artist, of an activist. And I think that just stayed. And then the move at 8 to New York, and you know, having to adjust to this other world and having to figure out where did he fit. And he's living in, you know, the Brooklyn and a Jewish community and there, and interacting with so many other people of his faith and seeing their concerns. He's not a, as Bernarda and most people said, he's not a practicing Jew. He doesn't go to synagogue, but he has a strong sense of the issues, the lives of the Jewish communities that he was so much a part of, and that informed his art, and particularly facing the nature of discrimination that was directed at the, you know, Jewish population in the U.S. I mean, he was, he lived that life, and it came second nature to him to be politically active, to be committed to justice, to have every part of his life devoted to somehow making a change for the better in terms of equity and social justice in the U.S.
I mean, I was surprised to read when I first read your book that, you know, he's 3 days a week working at the CIO, you know, as the graphic arts director.
Right.
Like, it really was significant and deep for him.
Yeah.
Can we talk about his writing a little bit? He's a wonderful writer. I mean, when I was just astonished by the shape of content and the lectures, and there's, I think, 6 lectures in there, and your book, you know, quotes your book, Ben Shahn, the bigger book with the pictures, quotes his writing quite a bit too. Yeah, I'm wondering if you can talk about that.
Well, and when you listen to him on the documentary, when he's being interviewed by the British journalist, he has a very interesting way of speaking. It's very precise, and it's very clear and articulate.
And kind of urbane too. Yeah.
Urbane, did you say?
Urbane, yeah.
And I think that reflects his continued interest in reading and education. I mean, he, from all accounts, when he wasn't talking, eating, or painting, he was reading. And reading a wide array of literature that was, you know, ranging from religious to the novels of Russian novels and American novels, the essays in Harper's and in The Nation. And I think he was just a finely educated, intelligent, and articulate person, and was able to bring into his writing the insights that he gained from his visual work. The two of them, it's just like the graphic art and the painting and the murals and the photography were sets of integrated and, you know, interconnected processes that fed on each other. So did his writing. His writing was in there as well. And,
yeah, he has a remarkable ability to put what he's doing visually into words. You know, usually in a visual person or a visual artist, that faculty is developed, and in a writer, you know, the verbal faculty is developed, but he seems to have both of them.
Right. And I know the first time I taught a class to artists at the Claremont Graduate School, it was a graduate seminar on post-1945 art. So I assumed that they would have to write papers because it was a graduate seminar and it was an art history seminar. And I know several of the students said, we're artists, we're here to paint, not to write. And I would just say, well, you don't have to divide the two. And many great artists have not divided the two. There were several artists that I learned about as I studied American art history who both wrote and painted. I mean, there was no need to make that separation. I know 19th century, many artists were very articulate in writing about their work and about other people's work as well. So I think Shahn was just a well-educated, well-rounded person who had in his wife Bernarda a sounding board and maybe an editor, as some people have argued, that helped make his art.
Wasn't she a journalist at first? I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
No, she was always an artist.
Okay.
A graphic artist. And well, she may have written as well. I'm not sure. You might be right there.
I thought she was working at a newspaper in Ohio when they met, but I defer to you on that. So, but
no, they met in New York.
Okay.
They met in the early 1930s when Shahn had been an assistant on the Rockefeller Center mural that Diego Rivera painted. And that was the time period that they met. So she may have been a journalist when she was back in Ohio, but by the time she came to New York, she was she was working as a printmaker initially, and then she moved into painting. I'm not sure when, maybe it was in the 1950s or maybe after Shahn died, and she moved to the studio and had a bit more room to create work. But she was also someone who did illustrations for labor organizations. They worked together. They did a mural together at the Bronx post office. So they were a personal, you know, they were a couple, but they were also a pair of artists who were able to inspire each other, and also in terms of writing, to help bounce ideas off each other to develop certain content.
And you were saying maybe she edited him too, possibly?
Some people said yes.
Yeah.
But that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, no.
I do think that these are his ideas.
Right.
I think he did the bulk of the writing, but we all
marriages work, you know, people that everybody's hand is in everything. Yes. Kind of. Yeah.
And I think that's I think that's definitely the case. She was a very talented person as well, both as a writer and an artist and an illustrator. So the two of them were a good pair. I think they really gave each other much needed support when times were pretty tough in the late 40s and early 50s.
How motivated was he actually by, we talked about his legacy, but how motivated was he by fame actually? Like, did he want to be famous? The documentary sort of makes the point toward the end that maybe he came up short, and with regard to, you know, his expectations of his reputation and his achievements or whatever. He was upset by the Clement Greenberg, you know, review of his show at MoMA, it seems. I don't know. I'm wondering if you could talk about that. Like, was that a driving force for him? It was unclear to me.
I don't know. I think as an artist who had developed a presence in New York, the Downtown Gallery was his gallery. He had fairly regular exhibitions. He was included in lots of group shows for the 30s and 40s. And you're right, in 47, he had his retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art. And he also, from all accounts, had a pretty big ego. So someone like that is going to want to be celebrated in some way. And I know after World War II, he writes a lot about the rise of abstraction. He doesn't dismiss it out of hand. He just says that it's not enough, certainly not, abstract form is not enough for him as an artist to create art that he feels is significant. So I think he was disappointed that his work was not getting the attention that it had in the past. On the other hand, he had a fairly devoted follower, or group of followers, collectors, people at journals, art directors of Harper's and The Nation, and The New Republic, as I said, Ed Murrow at CBS, who gave him that other platform. I think recognition from art critics would have been nice. He certainly appreciated it when he got it and was probably upset when he didn't. But he had this whole other audience that for him was very important. So if he didn't make it in the art world, in the way that he wanted to, and as I said, in the 50s, he was a popular artist among collectors and the downtown gallery and having exhibitions there. But he was overshadowed by this more aggressive celebration of abstraction by critics who were now becoming the spokespeople of American art. And what I also wanted to mention too is after the war, the GI Bill funded a lot more aspiring artists to go to school. More schools opened up. There was just more art, more artists, more galleries. And so it was becoming even more difficult to maintain a high profile within this increasingly competitive art world. So Shahn had his other communities to support him. And so I think while he was disappointed, he wasn't so involved in the art world. The art world wasn't his only source of support. So I think he fared that more critical response to his work. He fared it better than maybe a lot of other artists would, who didn't have a labor following, who weren't involved in the civil rights movement, who didn't have a life outside of their fine art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought it was interesting when I was reading the kind of title essay in The Shape of Content that he doesn't come out against abstraction. He says abstraction is drawing out the essence of a thing, and he does use some abstraction in his work, but against pure formalism, that is supposedly has no content. And I don't know, I thought that just struck me because you kind of, when you're reading about him, often you get these, antipodes, which is like abstraction here and Shahn over here doing figurative work or whatever, which is not really the case,
No, it's not, because his style does change.
Yeah.
It changes quite a bit.
I'm jumping back in.
It's time.
Oh.
Yes.
I hate to interrupt such a wonderful and insightful and meaningful conversation. In our last few minutes before we conclude, I do want you to talk a little bit about the relevance to now, his potential direct influence to contemporary politically oriented visual artists, if there is any, and which artists are sort of embracing that mantle of using art as a political foil that are making an impression on you?
I was thinking about if Shahn was alive today, the kind of images he would be producing. And it just, I'm glad he's not, but I'm sorry he's not.
That was my question. It was like, what would he be doing in this moment?
Well, I was thinking Shahn did this great poster of Barry Goldwater. And the title is something like, He Says No to Civilization and Survival. And it's Barry Goldwater in a diaper trying to put his foot in his mouth. And then in back are all these quotes of things that Barry Goldwater has said. And I could just see a poster with Trump in that similar position. Shahn would have been very much involved in contributing to movements like Black Lives Matter. He did the series of posters to raise money for the civil rights movement of Cheney and Schwimmer and who was the third, the three civil rights workers who were killed in the 60s. So I'm sure Shahn would have had something to say about George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Trayvon Martin. I can literally see the images that he would have produced as posters, graphic work, even what might have come out of that in terms of larger paintings and murals. There are a lot of artists today who are working in graphic media who are taking advantage of the internet, the different forms of distribution of art making. There was an artist collective in the late 90s, I think it was. I have to look it up in my textbook. Corkscrew Graphics that created a really amazing work dealing with 9/11 and the wars in Iraq. There's a organization called the Center for Political Graphics in Santa Monica. I think it's in Culver City now, that is very active in supporting and distributing the kinds of political work that has been the hallmark of much of that politically engaged art community through the 20th century. There are artists more infamously like Banksy who are doing this larger graphic work as a kind of, what do you call it, those pop-ups where you move into a situation and you do something that's very immediate that doesn't necessarily last for a really long time. So I think what's evolved in the art world among political artists, some of them, is the attempt to resist the commodification of their work, the recognition of the way in which the art world has become so hyper-inflated with celebrity artists and the investment in art now as futures, and instead of people looking for places to put the way too much money that they already have. So the critical, I think Shahn would have understood that as well, that there's an art institution that sometimes inhibits the ability of artists to really focus on the kinds of issues that are most relevant, not only to their own personal lives, but to the lives of their communities and the health of the nation and the world at large. He would have been engaged with climate change for sure. He was involved with the anti-nuclear movement. So I can't give you more specific names, but I know that there's a very healthy world of political art out there right now, and it's sorely needed.
I think from go ahead, Amanda, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, and we really have seen the return in estimation, I think, in the art world of figuration. I have just been writing about portraiture and the way that different artists of color, have been using portraiture. I was in particular writing about an Asian artist, as a way of carving out a kind of space of representational equity for themselves. So I think the emphasis on abstraction has diminished quite a bit in recent years too.
Yes, yeah. And what's also interesting is to look at the way text has emerged. I mean, Shahn was always combining imagery and text, which was seen as something that was not terribly significant back in the 1960s either. But the rise of conceptual art and the way that certain Edgar Heap of Birds and his work, where he inserts these signs into the landscape that call into question how we understand the nature of land, the ownership of land, or how landscape functions as a representation of culture and history. So I think figuration or abstraction, yes, abstraction, there are still people who are exploring that, but figuration has certainly returned in multiple forms.
Yeah, we didn't get too much into his gift as in the world of the illustrated manuscript, in the way that he could take Hebrew letters and English letters and make them so soulful and spiritual and artful, and his deep understanding of the power of letters and words and the visual context.
Right, because he designed those two, the alphabet of creation, his Hebrew alphabet and his folk alphabet, and his understanding again, there's the concept of form, the shape of content, form and content, that these letters in themselves are abstract, they're abstract shapes. And as such, they have form. There's a spatial quality. There's a way in which you compose each letter that appears in a text, and that itself plays with the notion of abstraction and figuration.
Well, I just want to thank you both as we wrap up. And Frances, I think your contributions to continuing the importance and legacy of Shahn's work are extraordinarily significant and greatly appreciated. And I hope that this program helps to further people's curiosity to discover more and to apply, the great discoveries of his life to our lives. Amanda as well. I look forward to you coming back to Las Vegas sometime soon. I know you're up in Montana right now.
I am, me too. Yes, I look forward to that as well. I miss it. And yeah, Frances, it was a great honor to get to interview you and to read your work.
Well, it was an honor for me too. And to I'm up here in southeastern British Columbia, so Amanda and I are actually fairly close to each other.
Not too far. If you ever get down to Montana, you must.
Yeah. But it was also great for me to get back to those roots of mine when I first started art history, and to read again about Shahn, because I never lose interest in him. So I definitely chose the right topic.
Yeah, he's endlessly fascinating.
Yeah. So first, I just wanted to say a few words about the passing of Sheldon Adelson. This Hebrew translates to "May his memory be a blessing for the future." And Sheldon has been a tremendous supporter of the Jewish Film Festival over the years, and also of the Jewish Nevada and the Jewish Community Center, as well as many other philanthropic causes in health and support for Israel and other important endeavors. And his work will continue through all of the initiatives that he has set in motion. And so we just take a moment to respect and honor his work and say prayers in his passing. Next month in March, we are going to be doing a 3-part program about Jews in poetry. In March, we're going to be focusing on 2 Jewish poets, Chaim Plutzik, who is a relatively under-acknowledged, important mid-century American Jewish poet. His film, there's a documentary called Chaim Plutzik, American Poet. And we're going to be having a webinar discussion with Bruce Isaacson, who is the first poet laureate of Clark County, and myself, in discussion about Chaim's contributions to poetry in America. And then our second program is going to be an interview and a reading from Louise Gluck, who is the current recipient of the 2020 Nobel Prize for Literature. And she is a very well-established and important Jewish American poet. And then we're going to be holding a workshop with local poets and anyone else who's interested in participating as a live Zoom webinar on March 13th to discuss Louise Gluck's work. And these programs are all for free, and we invite everyone to come and join us. We're now going to take a look at the trailer for the Chaim Plutzik film.
Well, they all say that about him. I mean, you know, the big shots, they have him among the neglected poets. So that's the term that's being used now.
I don't think much of anybody ever bought the books, but that's probably true for every poet from that era, except maybe Robert Frost.
Well, nobody ever said that a poet's life was supposed to be easy. It's not. Poets are supposed to do hard work. And the work is part of their lives, and it becomes part of their writing, too.
Imagine what he would have written in the 40 years since he died, because he did quite a bit.
Somehow this great feeling for the depths of life seemed to be something that was too much to bear.
Not that there was anything proud or self-presentational about him, but he did a major work and then he vanished.
I consider myself a married woman. With Chaim, no matter where I go, I'm a lucky one to have found the right person.
All poets, by definition, are neglected. Some are less well known than others, and it doesn't matter. They will be known at one point or another in time.
So we will be discussing the relationship between neglect and acclaim among the content and messages of these two significant poets, in my opinion, in March. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us on this webinar program. And please reach out to the Jewish Film Festival website at www.lvjff.org for more detailed information about this and other upcoming programs.